I think another big implication of this is that we're going to see a lot more money spent on judicial elections in North Carolina, because the big thing after 2028 is going to be redistricting.
Hi, and welcome to The Debrief. I'm Donna King, Editor-in-Chief of Carolina Journal. We've got a lot going on today. We're diving into two major developments reshaping really the political landscape, elections in North Carolina. First, a significant concession in the state Supreme Court race, and then second, the State Board of Elections, now under Republican control, makes some leadership changes. All right, digging into that with us today, helping us unpack some of these details, some of the most insightful voices we have here at the John Locke Foundation and Carolina Journal. Mitch Kokai, Senior Political Analyst for the John Locke Foundation, and Dr. Andy Jackson, Director of the Civitas Center for Public Integrity. All right, let's get right into it. We have a concession. We've been talking about this for weeks. Months, really, right? Let's start with that Supreme Court race. Judge Jefferson Griffin conceding to Allison Riggs. Give me the details about that.
Well, the first major development in the week was a ruling from U.S. Chief District Judge Richard Myers that was for the State Board of Elections, for Justice Allison Riggs, and against Jefferson Griffin. Basically, he said, regardless of any of the merits of the concerns about some of the people who were counted in that 2024 election, it's just too late in the game to be trying to throw out votes. He looked at the cure process that the state Supreme Court had endorsed for this and said, no, this violates equal protection of the laws and due process. You're going to be cutting out people's votes who should be counting. And he said, I might be able to come up with some other cure process that might work without those concerns, but it's too late in the game to do that. And so he issued an order that said the State Board of Elections had to certify Allison Riggs as the winner. He set a 1-week delay on that order, basically put a stay and said, if you're going to appeal, I'll give you a week to appeal. But 2 days later, Jefferson Griffin decided that he's going to give up the ghost. He's not going to appeal that ruling, which means that there will be a certification of Allison Riggs as the winner. She'll get to serve the full 8-year term on the state Supreme Court. Now, one thing that Griffin did say, partly I think to save face, but there is some merit to this, is that the courts, and especially the state Supreme Court and State Court of Appeals, did find some merit in some of his arguments against some of these votes. That if you voted without a photo ID, state law says you have to have a photo ID. There should not have been the situation where people were casting a ballot without providing photo ID. And also the people who've never lived in North Carolina, that they should not be able to cast ballots in a North Carolina election. He said that, that he saw that was a problem, and that courts recognized that that was a problem, but it's not going to affect his race. He does concede that long 6-month legal process is over. Justice Allison Riggs will serve the rest of her full 8-year term. And Jefferson Griffin, who's been serving on the Court of Appeals, stays on the Court of Appeals and has another 4 years on that term.
Sure. So this really doesn't make an ideological change on the highest court in the state?
Not at all.
Okay.
Remains 5 Republicans, 2 Democrats.
Right.
The interesting thing for the politics is, had Griffin won this race, it would have flipped to 6-1 Republican. The next time around in 2026, the only seat that's up for grabs now is a Democrat, Anita Earls. And so had Anita Earls' seat come up with a 6-1 Republican majority, it would have made it harder for Democrats to eventually retake the court, which is one of their goals. Now, they still can't do it in the next election cycle, but they could in 2028 if, after holding the Riggs seat, they hold the Earls seat.
Right.
They could retake a majority in 2028.
Sure. This case, if you haven't been following it, has made national attention. This is something that, this Supreme Court race in North Carolina is drawing political fire and headlines, everything here to North Carolina. What does that mean now for 2026? Because you just said Anita Earls. We now have Republican long-term representative Sarah Stevens jumping into the race, saying that she's going to be a constitutionalist. We're going to have just as much attention on this race?
I think it will probably get more attention than it would have otherwise because of what happened with this last election. state Supreme Court seats, for those who are in the know and for those who follow politics, they are important.
Sure.
We know that in Wisconsin and some other areas that have close splits between Republicans and Democrats, or conservatives and liberals on the courts. And North Carolina is no exception. So it does get attention anyway.
Sure.
Now, I think it'll get more attention now because people say, oh, remember 2024, and the part of the narrative will be Jefferson Griffin trying to steal the election.
Sure.
You don't want it to happen this time around. So I think it will get a little bit more attention than it has. But once again, unless something happens and another seat is up for grabs, it won't be a case of a chance to flip the court one way or the other. Once again, it'll be Democrats on defense, Republicans on offense, with a 5-2 Republican majority, and either a flip to 6-1 or maintaining the status quo.
Very interesting. Dr. Jackson, tell me the implications of this. You know, this has been a long, drawn-out saga. Do you see the legislature taking any action to avoid this happening in the future?
Well, I don't think it's really necessary. They may do it. The issues that were brought up with the missing ID numbers for voters, those are things that should have been fixed. There was a hearing in late 2023 where a citizen complaint came up that said there are a lot of registrations that are missing either the last four of your social security number or your driver's license number. And these numbers are important because they help match records.
Sure.
You know, everybody's assigned an individual number by the State Board of Elections, but those are unique to the State Board of Elections. You can't cross-check any references with that. And so that's going to be an important thing, and I think the board's going to voluntarily take that up. It's already been, the court has already said that it's unconstitutional to allow people who have never resided in the state to vote in the state.
Right.
So with that, you probably don't need to pass the law because the Board of Elections already knows, okay, we've got to fix this problem. The voter ID issue that we had, that's something else that the courts have said. So you probably don't have to have the General Assembly intervene on that one either. These are things that, now that the court has put the State Board of Elections on notice, they can go ahead and fix that. Now, if the State Board doesn't act, then you can go ahead and expect that the General Assembly is going to get into this themselves.
Sure.
I think another big implication of this is that we're going to see a lot more money spent on judicial elections, Supreme Court elections in North Carolina, because the big thing after 2028 is going to be redistricting. And so we're going to see a lot of national money coming into those 3 Supreme Court races because, as we've seen what has happened with the last couple of rounds of redistricting, that's another 2, 3, 4 congressional seats. And as close as Congress has been, I expect national political entities are going to want to get involved in these state races.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And for the Democrats to be able to take over after 2028, they have to hold that Earl's seat in 2026. So even though that's the only seat up for grabs, it's going to be important even in that cycle. But as Dr. Jackson was alluding to, 2028 will be hugely important for people watching this stuff.
Sure, sure. Well, now that said, as we go into 2028 and even 2026, we have a new elections board, a little shakeup going on there. You were there. Tell me what happened. So now the State Board of Elections is under appointment power of Dave Bullock, the state auditor, right? I mean, he acted really quickly and got some names out there.
Well, he had to act quickly because we had a lawsuit about this, of course.
Of course.
And it was settled just shortly before the time when he was supposed to make the appointment. This is supposed to be May 1st. He makes that appointment. The state board has a meeting, and in turn, that state board is going to decide the new executive director of the State Board of Elections, which is an important administrative position. And maybe, unfortunately, it's also a policy-making position, as we have seen more than once. Whoever is controlling that position functionally will have the role of setting the rules, or at least guiding the county boards in the rules on how they're going to be conducting these elections. It's a really important position. And so they replaced Karen Brinson Bell with Sam Hayes. He's an attorney who's been working in the General Assembly. He ran for Attorney General in 2020, didn't make it out of the Republican primary. So he's a known quality for Republicans in the Republican majority. He's somebody that they're comfortable with. He's somebody who knows the laws. And I think that he's going to be acting in a very different way than Karen Brinson Bell did.
And how so?
Well, like, for example, we had situations where going back to the 2020 race, where
Sure.
Karen Brinson Bell was ordered by the Democratic Majority State Board to enter into a settlement with Mark Elias, a Democratic lawyer.
Right.
And several of the things that Elias was asking for in his lawsuit were things that Karen Brinson Bell had also asked the General Assembly for. For example, the biggest one that comes to mind was essentially gutting the witness requirement for absentee ballots. She, with that settlement, which was later thrown out by a federal judge for violating 14th Amendment due procedure rights, she made it so that essentially anybody who turned in their ballots afterwards, after that ruling came out, they essentially didn't have to have a witness requirement. They could just submit an affidavit,
Sure.
and they were scot-free. That was thrown out. Under her leadership, the Board of Elections also twice tried to illegally suppress election observers to make it so that they could not fill their full time slots going into early voting especially, but also election day voting.
Right.
And so there were things like that, policy decisions like that, that I think are going to be very different under Sam Hayes.
Sure, sure. Now, critics are saying, look, we've just traded one problem for another. We had a Democrat political elections board. Now we have a Republican political elections board. Do you anticipate a different approach, or do you think we could be just trading one issue for another? Tell me what your thoughts are.
Well, I mean, there certainly would be a different approach because Republicans and Democrats approach these issues differently.
Right.
I think about when we had the 2020 election, for example, and Sherry Beasley was the one contesting the results, and she was, rather than trying to strike down votes, she was trying to add votes that county boards had said, well, these are not legal votes. And so that tends to be the Democratic approach when you have these kind of conflicts.
Right.
Whereas when Jefferson Griffin was making his complaints, they were saying, well, y'all have accepted illegal votes. And so a Republican board may look more like a Jefferson Griffin on these things than a Sherry Beasley. We'll see if it's a little different.
Parsing the letter of the law rather than changing,
Right, and so that's what I'm expecting.
Okay.
And we could have avoided this. There was a proposal to make it even partisan split.
Right.
Of course, there was a lawsuit that was thrown out.
Sure.
And so we could have had an even board where you'd have to have some compromise on a lot of things, but starting with who's going to be the executive director.
Sure, sure. Well, what's the implications for each party? Perhaps Democrats might have been better off under a bipartisan. Can't, win for losing.
Well, certainly you'd rather have your own partisans in charge when there's a question of which ballots are taken, what are the rules we're going to operate under, where the early voting site's going to be, how many early voting sites are we going to have. These are all different conflicts that have come up with these boards. And we have to remember, it's not just the State Board of Elections.
Right.
Every single one of North Carolina's 100 county boards of elections are also going to be switching from majority Democratic to majority Republican. And so I think, big and small, a lot of these election issues are going to be slightly different. Now, the law is the same. It hasn't changed.
Right.
So you're not going to see huge differences. But we have so many close elections in North Carolina that even a small change can make a big difference.
Sure, sure. Mitch, this really comes, I think, partly because there was such outcry about election integrity and concerns in 2016, 2020, now then 2024. This has been coming for a while. Do you think that this will get people to have more faith in the system?
Well, I certainly think that'll be true for Republicans because they'll have Republicans in charge and not have the situation that Andy was talking about where you have a Democratic board and a Democratic executive director working with Democratic operatives to get around the state laws through sue and settle schemes. So I think that will convince some Republicans that things are more on the up and up. And back to the earlier point about the opportunity to have an even split. If people are mad that Republicans are now in charge of the elections apparatus, they should say, well, tell the governor to stop suing. Because the General Assembly has tried on multiple occasions to change the Board of Elections, and they didn't until this last iteration call for a Republican-dominated board. What they wanted was first an even split,
right,
Republicans and Democrats. Then they even put forward a proposal that would have 4 Democrats, 4 Republicans, and 1 unaffiliated.
Sure.
And they were even willing to go along with the unaffiliated, who basically was an ex-Democrat who had changed to be unaffiliated, so was still really a Democratic board. But all of those got thrown out by the courts because the governor sued. And so that's why we ended up with the last time around in the legislation that came out after the last gubernatorial election. The General Assembly said, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to move the elections apparatus under another executive branch official who's elected statewide. They chose the auditor.
Sure.
They could have chosen the Secretary of State, which you see in some other states, but they chose the auditor, who is a Republican, and they said we're going to put all this apparatus under the auditor, but otherwise we're not going to change the boards. It's still going to be a 5-member board, still going to have 3 members from one party, 2 members from the other major party. Now, since it's a Republican making the appointments, like when we had a Republican governor, it'll be a 3-2 Republican board.
Sure.
But a lot of this is because the General Assembly has tried to reform this in the past and got shot down by the courts because of the governor complaining. I think another thing that's going to be important to come out of this is that at some point, now that this elections board has changed, the lawsuit is going to get resolved either at the Court of Appeals or potentially at the state Supreme Court. And it will be very interesting to see what those appellate courts say about the trial court's ruling in this case that basically said all of the other members of the Council of State are just advisors to the governor.
Right.
And we've seen some pushback from people who don't even have any dog in this fight, like Labor Commissioner Luke Farley, who said, wait a minute, you're talking about me too.
I won an election, yeah.
I haven't won an election. I'm not an advisor. So while it seems that the State Board of Elections issue for now is settled, that particular lawsuit has yet to be finalized, and it'll be very interesting to see what either the appeals court or ultimately the state Supreme Court says about the governor and his power versus the other executive branch officials who are elected statewide.
Sure,
I think it's interesting that we had this kind of fight, but the roles were flipped a few years ago about the unitary executive theory,
right,
with the first Trump administration suing, and lawsuits brought about and saying that really all the power in the executive branch flows through the president. And that kind of makes sense when you have only one elected person in a branch of government. But now we've the roles have flipped with, like, the Democrats are saying, well, we really have a unitary executive in North Carolina, but we have 9 other statewide elected executives who have assigned roles. And under the Constitution, those roles and what they do are assigned by the General Assembly. So I think it was a really strange take by the Superior Court, and I really don't expect it to hold up. Certainly once we have a full ruling from appeals and going up to the state Supreme Court.
And
it's just strange.
And that was probably one of the reasons why the appeals court put a stay on that ruling, which the appeals court's stay is what allowed Bullock to be able to move forward and make his appointments. But right now, that's where things stand with that case. You have the Superior Court ruling that was in favor of the governor. The appeals court slapped a stay on it, and that's where it stands. The governor and Democratic allies tried to get the state Supreme Court to step in, but as we're speaking right now, the state Supreme Court has been silent, hasn't said anything. They didn't say, we're not going to do it, we are going to do it. They just have said nothing.
All right. Well, we'll certainly be watching that really closely as these cases unfold and what happens with the North Carolina State Board of Elections heading into 2026. Here we go again. All right. Thanks so much for joining us on the debrief. Make sure you comment. I want to keep this conversation going. Let us know what you think about what we've been talking about today. We want to hear from you. Thanks so much. Did you learn something? Make sure you subscribe to Carolina Journal's YouTube channel and watch the debrief every week, where we're going to be breaking down everything happening in your state government. And check out carolinajournal.com for the latest breaking news.